The first sound that ever truly scared me wasn't a growl or a scream or even the crunch of a branch outside my cabin. It was silence. The kind of silence that lives, breathes, and moves through the pines when the wind forgets what direction to go. You don't realize how loud the forest usually is until it decides to listen back. I've worked in these woods for 17 years now, long enough to tell the difference between what's living, what's dying, and what's just pretending to be either. The Olympic Peninsula isn't kind to those who take it lightly. Most of the tourists see moss, waterfalls, and ferns, but the rangers, we see what the trees remember, and they remember everything. I was assigned to the north section of the forest, between Forks and the old trail systems leading toward Lake Crescent. Most nights, I'd camp out near the observation cabin off the service road. No cell reception, no radio after midnight, just me, the weather, and the feeling that something in the timberline kept count of every step I took. The locals used to warn me when I first moved here. They'd say, "Don't whistle after dark. Don't talk back when you hear your name." I thought it was small-town folklore meant to spook newcomers. But those same locals stopped hiking the trails after dusk. That should have told me enough. The first time I felt something was off, it was during a fire inspection in mid-autumn. The air was still, heavy with the weight of rain that hadn't fallen yet. I was walking down toward the ridge when I smelled smoke, sweet, almost like burning cedar. I checked the thermal scanner. No heat signatures. Nothing visible, but the scent followed me, winding around the trail as though it knew where I'd step next. At the bend near an old hollowed-out cedar, I heard a voice. My name, soft, careful, stretched between the trees. It wasn't echoing. It was closer than that, like someone whispering directly into the back of my mind. I turned, flashlight steady, scanning the underbrush. Nothing but the slow drift of fog. I thought maybe it was one of the volunteers from base. So I called out, but my voice came back wrong, hollow, flattened, as if the forest itself swallowed it. That night, back at the cabin, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pines, black silhouettes leaning toward the window, listening. At 2:43 a.m., I heard knocking. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. Not on the door, not the glass, on the wood beams themselves, like something was moving along the outer wall. I grabbed the rifle, stepped outside, and saw footprints in the soil. Bare human prints, but they were facing toward the cabin, not away. The next morning, I filed it as possible trespassing, though deep down I knew it wasn't that. When you've worked long enough in these woods, you start to notice patterns that don't fit human logic. Tracks that begin in the middle of clearings, whistles that travel against the wind, and stories, old stories, the locals still whisper when they drink too long in the taverns. One of them was about the spirit of the pines, a name they never said twice in the same night. They said it was the echo of those who vanished here, taking shape in the forest's breath. Sometimes it came as smoke, sometimes as a voice, and if you followed it into the trees, you didn't come back the same. I didn't believe it then. I do now. 2 weeks after the knocking, I found something on patrol that made me stop believing in coincidences. It was late afternoon, that hour when the sun turns the whole forest copper and the light cuts through the needles like glass. I was checking the trail markers near an old cave system locals called the Whistle Hollows. It wasn't on any official map anymore. The entrance had collapsed decades ago after a landslide, but hunters still whispered about hearing sounds coming from inside, like windpipes or human humming. I hiked up to the ridge, clipboard in hand, documenting erosion levels. That's when I saw it. About 20 feet from the blocked entrance, a ranger's badge half buried in the moss. The brass was tarnished, bent along one side, but the emblem was still clear enough to read. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't current issue. This one had the 1980s logo, before the department redesign. There hadn't been a ranger posted out here since 1997. I brushed the dirt off and saw initials scratched on the back. MT. I didn't know anyone by that name, but the archives would. I slipped it into my pocket and kept walking, though I'll admit I didn't look at the cave again. The air around it was colder than the rest of the ridge, like the sunlight didn't dare go near it. When I got back to the outpost that night, I checked the old personnel records. Sure enough, there was a Ranger Martin Tueller listed as missing. Last seen near the Whistle Hollows on September 23, 1996. The report said presumed lost due to rock collapse. But the funny thing was, the official recovery log was blank. No remains. No rescue attempt filed. It was as if the forest had simply claimed him. I sat there for a long time, staring at that badge. It wasn't rusted enough for 30 years. It looked like it had been out there maybe a month. Around midnight, I went outside to clear my head. The trees were whispering again, not like wind through needles, but the slow rhythm of syllables. If you've ever heard your name whispered by something that doesn't breathe, you'll know exactly what I mean. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't wind. It was intent. I stood there until the generator flickered and the motion sensor light cut out. For one heartbeat, the forest went absolutely black. And that's when I heard the second voice, a low, ragged breathing behind me. I turned fast, flashlight trembling over the fog, but all I saw were two depressions in the grass, like something heavy had just stepped back. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I checked the sensor camera near the cabin. One frame was corrupted, distorted static frozen across the lens. But within that haze, I could still make out the shape of a figure standing at the tree line. Tall, hunched, the outline of something furred with arms too long for its body. For half a second, I thought it was a bear, but the eyes were level with the camera, 7 feet high. When I reported it to the district supervisor, he didn't look surprised. He told me, "Stay away from Whistle Hollows. Let the forest keep what it wants." That was the moment I realized how much we didn't talk about out here. Not the voices, not the disappearances, not the shadows that sometimes moved wrong. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. The food supply in my cabin started to spoil overnight, even the sealed cans. My boots were damp each morning, though I hung them inside. The radio crackled with faint voices repeating words that didn't match my broadcasts. Once I thought I heard someone humming that same tune I'd caught near the cave, a long, mournful note rising and falling like a human breath. By the fourth night, I'd stopped trying to explain it. Logic has no place in a forest that's older than your language. It just waits for you to stop pretending you're safe. The breaking point came during a routine search and rescue. A hiker had gone missing near the North Basin, about 2 miles from where I found the badge. The call came in at dawn. I joined the team, 6 of us heading out under a drizzle that never really stopped. The forest felt different that morning, muted, like every sound was being swallowed before it could echo. We split up at the ridge. My path led past a stream so still it reflected the canopy like a mirror. That's when I saw movement, a figure walking between the trees on the opposite bank. Same uniform, same hat, same gait as any ranger. I shouted across the water, thinking it was one of my team. The figure stopped, turned, and lifted its head. The face looking back at me was mine. For a full second, we just stared at each other, 2 silhouettes mirrored in the fog. Then it raised its hand, palm open, and pointed behind me. I turned, and the woods were empty. When I looked back, the reflection was gone. Only the rippling water remained. I radioed in, voice shaking, but no one answered. Static filled the channel, then that same slow humming sound. The same rhythm from the cave. The same one that carried my name. Something in me broke then. I ran until the forest blurred, until the rain turned to mist on my skin, until I stumbled into a clearing I didn't recognize. And there in the mud were footprints. Bare, fresh, leading straight toward a black opening in the hillside. The Whistle Hollows had reopened. I should have turned back. Every instinct I had, every training manual, every ounce of reason screamed at me to radio for backup and retreat. But standing there, staring at the mouth of that cave, it felt like something beneath my ribs was pulling me forward. Not curiosity, not bravery, something else. Something that had been waiting for me to find it. The entrance was half collapsed, littered with shale and rotted roots, but a gap wide enough for a man remained. The smell hit me first, earth, damp, and metallic, like old blood on cold stone. I aimed my flashlight into the opening. The beam cut through dust motes that drifted like ash, and deeper inside, for just a moment, I thought I saw breath, mist moving against the direction of the draft. I ducked in, crawling on hands and knees until the tunnel widened enough to stand. My radio hissed, spitting static. I tapped it twice, whispering, "This is Ranger 7-2. I'm inside the hollows." Silence. The feedback rose to a high whine and then went dead. The cave sloped downward. My boots scraped against slick rock, and the sound echoed back a half-second late, as if something else were following just a few steps behind. I paused, listening. The echo paused, too. I took one more step, heard another step after mine. I spun around, flashlight trembling. Empty tunnel. The only movement came from water dripping somewhere in the dark. I told myself it was the acoustics, just tricks of sound. But then came that humming again, low and steady, threading through the air like a vibration you feel in your bones. The tunnel opened into a chamber the size of a small room. My light caught carvings on the walls, old hand-chiseled symbols, circles within circles, all converging around a single mark that looked like an eye. The edges of the carvings were blackened, scorched maybe, as if burned into the stone. And in the center of the room was something worse, a ranger's uniform. Faded green, jacket folded neatly over itself, badge still pinned, the same initials scratched on the one I'd found in the moss, MT. Beneath it lay a pair of boots, filled with dirt as if the ground had risen up through them. I knelt, brushing the dust aside. That's when I noticed the footprints surrounding the uniform. Not leading to it, leading out. I froze. A faint sound came from the tunnel behind me. A scrape, then another. Then the rhythmic tapping, 3, pause, 2. The same sequence that had haunted my cabin walls, only this time it was closer. I turned my flashlight toward the sound. The beam flickered, stuttered, then steadied on something just beyond the circle of light. A shape, taller than any man, hunched beneath the rock ceiling. Its outline wavered like heat distortion, but the eyes glowed faintly amber. Not like reflection, not like an animal. They were lit from within, like coals buried in ash. It didn't move at first, it only watched. And when it breathed, the air around it shimmered. The smell of cedar smoke filled the chamber again, thick and sweet. I took one step back, my boot hit loose gravel, and the sound echoed unnaturally loud. That's when it spoke, my name, drawn out, syllable by syllable, like someone learning how to use a mouth. The voice came from everywhere, the walls, the ceiling, the space behind my eyes. "Why do you keep coming back?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. My throat locked up. It tilted its head, slow, deliberate. And I swear I heard bones creak, the kind that aren't supposed to move that way. Then, from the darkness, something else joined it. Footsteps. More of them. A chorus of breathing. The air thickened, pulsing with sound, humming that rose into a kind of chanting rhythm. The carvings on the walls began to hum too, vibrating in the beam of my light. I bolted. The tunnel ahead narrowed, and I crawled through, scraping my elbows on rock, feeling the tremor of something large moving behind me. The flashlight beam bounced wildly, revealing faces in the walls. No, not faces, impressions, like someone had pressed human features into soft stone. Every surface pulsed with that rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 2, over and over, following me. When I burst out into daylight, the first thing I did was gasp. The air felt wrong, heavy. The trees around the cave weren't the same. The pines leaned at strange angles, their bark charred black. My truck wasn't where I'd parked it. My radio still dead. And the sky, clouds moving in opposite directions. I stumbled down the ridge trying to orient myself. The terrain looked familiar but subtly twisted. Paths that should have led downhill curved uphill instead. Every turn brought me back to the same clearing, the same scorched pines. The smell of cedar smoke grew stronger until it coated my tongue. Then I heard whistling, low, almost playful. I turned and saw a figure standing between the trees, a man in a ranger's uniform, same height, same hat, same badge number. Me. He smiled faint, eyes dark like burnt wood, and then, in perfect mimicry, he lifted his hand and tapped his thigh 3 times, paused, then twice more. Something in my mind cracked then. My knees gave out. I screamed, not out of pain, but because I finally understood what the locals meant when they said the forest keeps what it wants. That thing in the cave hadn't followed me out. I'd followed it. By the time I made it back to the outpost, the sun was down. The generator light glowed a sickly yellow. My logbook lay open on the desk, pages flipped to an entry I didn't remember writing. The ink still wet. It said, Ranger Martin Tueller accounted for. Transfer complete. I don't remember sleeping. I don't remember closing my eyes. But when I woke, my boots were full of dirt, the same dirt from the cave. I've read that trauma can bend memory, make moments replay out of order, rearrange them so your mind can keep functioning. But the things that happened after that night didn't feel like memories. They felt like a warning, repeating itself through me. The morning after I found that logbook entry, I tried to radio headquarters again. Static. Then a faint voice, broken but familiar. Mine. Saying the same words I'd spoken the night before. Ranger 7-2, I'm inside the hollows. Over and over, looping until I cut the transmission. The echo of my own call for help bouncing back from somewhere I hadn't left. By noon, I packed my gear and started down the service road. My goal was simple. Reach the highway, turn in my badge, leave the forest. But each mile felt longer than the last. The road curved wrong, turning back toward the ridgeline no matter which fork I took. My compass spun like the needle was drunk. Even the light changed, dimming without clouds, brightening without sun. When I finally came across another ranger station, an old one built in the 60s, boarded over and forgotten, I broke the lock and went inside. Dust lay thick over everything except one table, where a single item sat waiting, a folded ranger's map, open to the North Basin. And on it, a small note written in charcoal. We're not lost, we're remembered. I didn't understand then, not until I heard movement outside. Through the cracked window I saw them, silhouettes standing among the pines, too tall, too still. Some wore fragments of uniforms, others the outline of what might once have been human. Each shape carried the same faint glow in the eyes. They weren't moving toward me. They were waiting, watching. That's when I realized the forest wasn't haunted by spirits. It was keeping them, holding pieces of everyone who ever vanished here. Every footprint, every breath, every last whisper of fear. The woods don't feed on blood. They feed on memory. I stayed inside that station until nightfall. The air thickened again, and the smell of cedar smoke crept under the door. I sat there, rifle across my lap, whispering to stay awake, to stay myself. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember is hearing the tapping again. 3 knocks. Pause, 2. Coming from beneath the floorboards. I pried them up with my knife. The cavity beneath was shallow, just enough space for a man's arm to fit. My flashlight trembled as I shone it down, and there, carved into the dirt, were hundreds of tally marks. Some fresh, others worn smooth, and one word written beneath them all. Return. I dropped the light. It spun once, then went out. Something shifted in the dark. Not loud, just the slow rustle of weight moving toward me. I ran, crashing through the doorway into cold air. The forest was alive with whispering. My name, their names, all the ones the woods had taken. They weren't calling for help anymore. They were calling me back. I don't remember how I made it out. I must have run for hours, blind, lungs on fire. When I saw headlights through the trees, I thought I was hallucinating. A pickup truck idled on the gravel road. A local logger climbed out, flashlight aimed at my face. Jesus, you okay? He asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. I didn't have an answer. He drove me into town. The moment we crossed the forest line, my watch began working again. The static in my radio stopped. The air even smelled different, ordinary, like pine and diesel. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to safe. But safety doesn't erase what the woods remember. When I reported everything, what I saw, what I heard, the supervisor told me to take leave. Stress-related breakdown, they called it. They closed Whistle Hollows again, sealed the trails, archived my logs. My statement was never filed. But sometimes when I wake in the middle of the night, I can still smell the smoke. It seeps through open windows, through walls, through the cracks in the quiet, and I'll hear faint humming somewhere in the distance. The same low, steady rhythm that once guided me into the dark. People ask why I still live here, why I didn't move somewhere far away, somewhere without trees. I don't think the forest would let me. You can leave the pines, but they don't leave you. There's a saying among rangers, we protect the forest, but it protects itself too. I used to believe that meant we worked in partnership with nature. Now I know it's something else entirely. The forest protects what it owns, what it keeps. When I drive the patrol road now, I pass the same ridge where Whistle Hollows used to be. The landslide finally covered the cave again, or maybe it never existed. Maybe it only opens for the ones it chooses. But every so often on certain fog-heavy mornings, I'll see smoke curling up through the branches. Sweet, like burning cedar. And in that moment, if I listen closely enough, I can hear the forest breathing. Not the wind, something slower. Older. Listening back. Waiting. I used to think I was its guardian. Now I think I'm its story. If you ever find yourself hiking out here, remember this. When the woods go quiet, when every sound holds its breath and the air tastes like smoke, turn back. Don't call out. Don't answer if something calls your name. The trees remember, and they'll remember you, because some stories aren't meant to be told around campfires. They're meant to be whispered through the pines, long after the last light dies. And if someday you hear a ranger's voice on the radio from a place that doesn't exist anymore, don't answer. Just keep walking. The forest doesn't sleep. It exhales. It creaks. It dreams in the voices of the wind. And when you've spent enough nights out here, when the last lantern goes out and the sky turns into a black mirror above you, you start to hear it breathing back. My name doesn't matter much anymore. What I remember most is the sound of my own boots over pine needles, the crunch of old cones under heel, and the radio static whispering through my shirt pocket. I was 35 when I started working as a ranger in the Clearwater National Forest, somewhere along the border between Idaho and Montana. Most folks drive through it and think it's endless beauty, untouched wilderness. But spend enough nights under those trees, and you'll learn that the forest keeps its own kind of company. I came out here for peace. That's the truth. I was coming off a long stretch of city work, emergency response, too many sirens, too many nights without sleep. I wanted quiet. I wanted to be useful again, to protect something alive and good. My first season, I thought the pines were listening to me. I'd walk patrols at dawn, fog wrapping around my ankles like low smoke, and every branch seemed to turn when I passed. The air smelled sharp, sap, frost, iron from the stream beds. That smell made me feel grounded, like I could breathe again. The locals were friendly enough, but they spoke with a certain reverence when they talked about the woods. They didn't tell stories the way tourists wanted to hear them. They didn't joke about bears or ghosts. They just lower their voices and say things like, "Don't wander after dark," or "The old growth doesn't like flashlights." There was this woman, June. She ran the tiny grocery near the ranger station. So she said it plain one evening while handing me a carton of eggs. "You'll hear them before you see them. Don't ever answer when they call your name." I laughed back then, not to mock her, but because I thought I understood folklore. Every forest's got its legends, skinwalkers, ghosts, things that sound like people. It's a way of explaining danger, of keeping kids from getting lost. But as the years went by, I started to notice things that didn't fit any wildlife report. The first was the echo. It was a late September morning, my third year out here. The air was brittle with cold, the kind that snaps twigs before dawn. I was stationed up near the Selway River, checking on a bridge that hunters often use during elk season. I parked the truck by the bend and radioed in my coordinates. The static came back like it always did, a soft hum, then my partner's reply from 40 miles off. Nothing unusual. But when I stepped out, I heard something bounce back from the trees, a delayed echo of my voice, softer, like someone mimicking me from deeper inside the forest. Station 4. Checking in. My words repeated, but the timing was wrong. 2, maybe 3 seconds later. And it wasn't quite my tone. Too flat. Too measured. I remember turning toward the sound, scanning the ridgeline. The sun hadn't crested yet, but the mist was thinning enough to see the faint silver outlines of trunks vanishing into the dark. I called out, thinking maybe another ranger was nearby. No answer. Only the drip of meltwater from branches. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been overheard, like something intelligent had been testing how close it could come to my voice without being noticed. The next week, a volunteer named Caleb went missing. He was a college kid, studying environmental science, spending the summer collecting water samples, knew the terrain well enough, wasn't reckless. When his radio went silent, we assumed a dead battery or maybe a fall. We sent out 3 teams. I was part of the Northern Search Group. We combed through miles of pine and hemlock, calling his name until the words lost meaning. Caleb, you copy? This is Unit 3. Every time I shouted, the forest seemed to take a breath, then throw the sound back at me, not as an echo, but as a response. Copy. This is Unit 3. It was faint, scattered, but it was there. My own words coming back through the static of the trees. I told myself it was a trick of acoustics, maybe the valley bouncing my voice. But deep down, I knew the forest wasn't built like that. I'd walked this ground for years. The sound didn't belong. We found Caleb's pack 2 days later. It was torn, half buried under pine needles, straps shredded like something had clawed through them. But there were no prints, no bear, no cougar, just small impressions near the mud by the creek. Bare feet, human-sized but deeper, as if whatever left them was heavier than a man. The official report listed unknown cause, presumed hypothermia. That's what you write when there's no blood, no struggle, no reason to stay awake at night. But I remember the way June looked at me when I told her we'd stopped the search. She said, "You should have stayed out there one more night. Sometimes they bring back what's theirs." That phrase stayed with me, brought back. Over the next few months, I started to feel the woods watching me differently. Birds went silent whenever I crossed certain clearings. My flashlight would flicker near the base of the older pines, and at night, when I tried to sleep in the station cabin, I'd hear soft tapping on the outer walls, like knuckles testing the wood grain. At first, I thought it was just pine cones falling. But the sound moved around the cabin, circling. Tap, pause, tap, tap. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, like someone trying to remember a song. One night I finally stepped outside, revolver holstered, beam cutting through the fog. The air was colder than it should have been. My breath fogged and disappeared, like it had been taken away. The tapping stopped, but in the distance, maybe 30 yards out, I saw movement, something tall, pale against the dark, half hidden behind the trees. It wasn't shaped right for a bear or elk. It was too upright, shoulders too broad, neck too short. I took one step forward, and it moved too, mirroring me, slow and deliberate. My first instinct was to call out, but June's voice echoed in my head, "Don't answer when they call your name." So I kept silent. I watched. The thing leaned sideways, peering around the tree like it was studying me. The forest was absolutely still. No wind, no rustle. Then, in a voice that wasn't quite human, it whispered, softly, almost beneath the hum of my blood, my name. Not shouted, not echoed, whispered. I froze. And before I could react, it said it again. Closer now, the sound vibrating in my chest like it was coming from behind me. That's when I broke. I bolted inside, locked the door, killed the light. The tapping started again, slower this time, moving up the cabin walls to the roof. I don't remember sleeping that night. When dawn came, everything looked normal. No prints, no marks. Just quiet trees and that same indifferent morning light. But I could feel something had changed. Like the forest knew my fear now, like it had learned it. After that night, I stopped laughing at local stories, and that was only the beginning. A few weeks passed after that night, but the forest didn't feel the same anymore. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was cautious. It listened before it spoke. I'd find myself hesitating at the tree line before each patrol, waiting for the woods to permit me in, like some ancient etiquette was required that I didn't understand. The air changed too. It had a thickness now, a kind of invisible static that lived in the spaces between sounds. Even my radio caught it. Static came and went without pattern, crackling, whispering, clicking like insect legs. Once, while I was driving up a dirt service road, it sputtered on by itself and played back a fragment of something that made my chest tighten, a single drum beat, low and deliberate, echoing like it came from underground. That same day, dispatch sent me north to check on a noise complaint from a backcountry campsite near Moose Creek. The hikers said they'd heard what they thought was distant thunder, but the sky had been clear. Drumming, one report said. Not man-made, not wind. Something big. I tried not to let my imagination run wild. The woods carry sound in strange ways. A branch breaking half a mile off can sound like a tree splitting beside your ear. But that afternoon, when I parked near the trailhead, something in me tightened. The kind of instinct that comes from years of knowing when a storm's about to break even under blue sky. The forest was darker than usual, even though it was midday. The pines here grew older, thicker, their bark blackened and glossy like wet stone. I walked the first mile without issue, the forest floor soft with moss. Every so often I'd stop, listening to my own heartbeat. Then, faintly, the rhythm started. A deep, hollow thud, spaced evenly, slow as a pulse. Thump, thump. It came from somewhere ahead beyond a ridge. Not thunder, not an echo, a rhythm. I followed the sound for another 20 minutes until I found a clearing that looked wrong somehow. The ground was bare, not cleared, just empty of life. No ferns, no fallen needles, just earth that looked churned, pressed down by something heavy. In the center stood a massive pine, older than anything I'd seen, its trunk split into 3 columns that twisted back together near the crown. It looked ancient, gnarled, the kind of tree you felt instead of saw. The drumming stopped. Then I noticed the carvings. Dozens of small figures had been etched into the bark, human-like shapes, each with a hole where the face should be. They spiraled around the trunk upward, their bodies growing more distorted the higher they climbed. Some were missing limbs, others were merged together at the arms or spine. I reached out, brushing the grooves with my glove, and felt a faint vibration, like the hum of machinery buried deep beneath the soil. And then the air shifted. It started as a whisper, the wind moving through the needles above. But the whisper became clearer, layered, multiple voices murmuring together. Not words I understood, but tones, pitches, sounds that pressed into the space behind my eyes. It was almost like listening to a language that wasn't meant for human ears. My knees went weak. I stumbled back, clutching my radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3, checking in from North Sector. Do you copy?" Nothing. Just static. Then, beneath the static, a faint echo, my own voice. "Copy, from North Sector." Exactly the same words, half a second delayed. The forest swallowed my breath. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I couldn't move. I stared at that tree, and for a split second, I saw movement behind it, something tall and dark, sliding along the bark, too fluid for flesh. It didn't step, it seemed to flow. I blinked, and it was gone. The drumming started again, closer now, like footsteps beneath the soil. The ground trembled faintly, and somewhere to my left, a branch snapped like a rifle shot. I backed away, slow, flashlight trembling in my hand, though it was still daylight. Then I heard it, the whisper of my name, not from the trees, from below. It came up through the ground, muffled, warped, like someone calling from inside the earth itself. My breath caught. I turned and ran. Branches clawed at my jacket, shadows flickered at the edges of my vision. The rhythm followed me, the thud of unseen drums keeping pace. When I reached the truck, my lungs felt like they were bleeding. I slammed the door, locked it, turned the key, and the engine died before it could turn over. That's when I saw the prints. In the mud beside the truck were 2 massive impressions, shaped vaguely like feet, but too long, too flat, the toes pointed and dragging behind as if whatever made them had been sliding forward. I stayed there until nightfall, gripping the wheel, every nerve waiting for the thing to appear at the edge of the headlights. It never did. Eventually, the forest settled back into that uneasy quiet. But I didn't sleep that night, not even after I made it back to the station. I filed my report the next morning. Unexplained auditory phenomenon, potential seismic activity. I left out the carvings, the whispers, the footprints. You learn quickly in this job what not to say if you want to keep it. But I did something else I hadn't done before. I drove into town that evening and found June. She was sitting outside the store, smoking, eyes fixed on the tree line like she'd been expecting me. I told her what I'd seen, every detail. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she flicked her ash into the dust and said softly, "You found one of their trees." "Whose trees?" I asked. "The ones that remember," she said. "The ones that were here before the mountains had names. They keep what's lost in the forest. Sometimes they keep what's found, too." Her words made no sense, but something in her tone made my stomach twist. Before I left, she added, "If you ever hear your name again, don't look where it's coming from. They learn your voice first." That night, I locked the cabin windows, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the wood sounded deliberate, like footsteps circling the building. Around 2 a.m, I woke to a sound that made my blood run cold. 3 slow knocks on the door. Knock, knock, knock. I waited, breath caught in my throat. The knocks came again, this time from the wall near my bed. When I finally dared to move, I realized something worse. The knocks were answering each breath I took, keeping time with my heartbeat. I lay there until dawn, afraid even to blink. And when I finally opened the door, the ground outside was clean. No prints, no signs of anything human, just pine needles and silence. That was the night I stopped feeling like a ranger and started feeling like prey. They say the forest reveals its secrets slowly, one layer at a time, like bark peeling from a dying tree. But by the start of that winter, I felt like it wasn't revealing anything. It was feeding me pieces it wanted me to see. The rest stayed buried. After the knocking nights, I started hearing about more disappearances. A hunter named Roe, 2 hikers from Spokane, a photographer who'd been camping alone near Clearwater Creek. The search teams found abandoned gear, half-frozen meals, boots left neatly side by side, as if whoever wore them had simply decided to walk into the dark barefoot. The official explanations never fit. Hypothermia-induced confusion. Accidental fall. But you could hear it in the other rangers' voices. None of us believed it. Then the call came in about the cave. A geologist from the University of Idaho had been mapping new karst formations along the lower ridges and found what he described as an unlisted vertical system. His last GPS ping stopped transmitting halfway through the second day. Helicopters couldn't spot any movement. I was assigned to a 2-person ground recon. The other ranger, Barrett, was someone I trusted, mid-40s, methodical, not prone to superstition. We geared up, packed rope, flares, and emergency comms, and headed out before sunrise. By mid-morning, we'd reached the ridge. The terrain was steep and fractured, pines clutching at the slope like they were holding the mountain together. The air was heavy, the kind that presses on your skull. We found the geologist's camp near the base of a bluff. Tent collapsed, notes scattered, coffee cup tipped and frozen to the ground. The cave mouth was 20 yards away. At first glance, it didn't even look like a cave, just a crack between boulders, dark and narrow. But the ground around it was wrong. No debris, no fallen needles, no animal tracks, just smooth dirt as if something moved in and out regularly, sweeping the entrance clean. Barrett knelt, shining his light inside. "Wind's coming out of it," he said. "That shouldn't happen. Caves breathe in, not out." He was right. There was a faint draft, warm and slow, like the exhale of something alive. We radioed in, but the line dissolved into static. I could hear faint fragments of my own words echoing back through the speaker, like the forest was mocking our attempt to reach the outside world. We secured our lines and started down. The entrance was slick, walls pulsing with condensation that smelled like wet metal and rot. The light from my headlamp flickered off surfaces that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Roots or veins or something that just pretended to be still. About 30 feet in, we reached a chamber wide enough to stand upright. The ground sloped toward a shallow pool that reflected our lights like oil. I knelt beside it, noticing something half submerged near the edge. It was a journal, soggy, torn, but still legible in places. I flipped through the pages carefully. The handwriting started clear. Mapping section B. Found chamber leading down, hearing water movement. Then, several pages later, the words lost form. Curved lines, spirals, repeated symbols. The last page read, "They're not echoes, they're mouths." I remember feeling a pulse through the floor beneath me, subtle at first, then growing stronger, as if the cave had a heartbeat. Barrett hissed something under his breath. I turned my light to him. He was staring at the far wall. Shapes moved there, shadowed figures crawling just beyond the reach of the beam. They weren't reflections. They were tall, jointed wrong, shoulders almost brushing the ceiling, their heads tilted toward us, listening. I could hear the faint shuffle of their limbs against the rock. Barrett raised his flashlight, but the beam cut out instantly. Dead. I swung mine around, catching a glimpse of something pale and featureless sliding backward into the dark. It didn't run. It withdrew. The air turned heavy, hot with the smell of soil and something animal. Then we heard it. The drumming again. But this time it wasn't distant. It was beneath us, in the rock itself, pounding in a rhythm that made my bones ache. We didn't speak. We just moved, slowly, carefully, back toward the rope. The sound followed, echoing up through the passage. At one point, something brushed my boot, wet, cold, like a hand gripping the leather for a moment before letting go. I didn't look down. I didn't need to. When we finally reached the surface, Barrett collapsed onto the ground, gasping. The sunlight looked wrong, duller, tinted green through the canopy. The forest was silent. No birds, no wind. We hiked back in near total quiet. At one point, Barrett said, "We weren't alone in there." I nodded, too drained to lie. When we reached the truck, I realized something strange. Our watches were off. Both had stopped at exactly the same time, 3:17 p.m., even though the sun said it was closer to 6. The official report classified the cave as unstable, entry restricted. It was sealed a week later, though I never saw who did it. Just one morning, it was gone, filled, covered in fresh soil, not even the scar of machinery left behind. But something followed us out. Barrett was the first to change. He stopped answering calls, missed shifts, started camping alone in the woods near the ridge. One evening, I found him at the ranger station standing by the window in the dark. "They're still drumming," he whispered. "You just can't hear it during the day." He wouldn't look at me when he said it. His skin looked gray, like he hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. 2 days later, he disappeared. They found his hat on a stump beside the sealed cave. Nothing else. The night after they called off his search, I woke to that same rhythm again, low, pulsing through the floorboards of my cabin. I pressed my ear against the wall, and underneath it, faintly, I heard Barrett's voice. Not speaking, humming. That was when I realized something, maybe what June had meant. The forest doesn't just take people, it absorbs them. And once it learns your sound, it never forgets it. I thought about quitting, about leaving the badge on the desk and driving east until the trees thinned into desert. But you don't escape something that knows your name. You just keep moving and hope it doesn't answer back. That winter, the locals stopped going out after dusk. The old-timers said the pine spirits were restless again. The season of whispering had begun. I didn't believe in spirits, but I believed in echoes. And every night, the forest seemed to breathe louder. Winter in Clearwater can make you feel like you've been buried alive. The snow falls in sheets that muffle everything. Your breath, your thoughts, the sound of your own boots. The forest changes its shape. What used to be a trail becomes a wound through a frozen body, and the trees lean in closer, like they're waiting for you to say something you shouldn't. After Barrett vanished, I worked alone. The department didn't have the budget to replace him, or maybe no one wanted the assignment anymore. I'd drive patrol routes that hadn't seen a ranger in months, cutting through corridors of pines that looked cloned from one another. Sometimes, through the mist on the windshield, I'd swear I saw a figure between the trunks, too still to be animal, too pale to be bark. The drumming hadn't stopped. It just changed rhythm. At first, I thought it was snow falling from branches, but then I realized it was too steady, too deep. It was like the forest had developed a heartbeat, synchronized with mine. When I stopped walking, it stopped. When I breathed, it breathed back. By February, I wasn't sleeping much. My dreams had become crowded with faces I didn't recognize. Hollow-eyed, skin gray-green like soaked wood, whispering in languages that hummed more than spoke. Sometimes I'd wake to find myself standing at the cabin window, staring into the tree line, sure I just heard someone call my name. One night, I decided to answer back. It wasn't courage, it was exhaustion. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't hear them. Around midnight, I put on my jacket, stepped out into the snow, and walked toward the ridge. The moon was a pale smear above the pines, and the cold bit into my skin like needles. The forest was wide awake. I could feel it. When I reached the old trail near the sealed cave, I stopped. The snow was untouched, but beneath it I could hear faint vibrations, drumming, distant but constant. The ground almost seemed to pulse under my boots. I said my name aloud. My voice sounded too small, and then from somewhere deep beneath the ice it came back. Not an echo, not my voice. Something heavier, older. It said my name wrong, dragging the vowels like it was trying to relearn human speech. I should have run. But the truth is, I felt a pull. Not of fear this time, but of recognition. Like something inside that cave already knew me, already understood why I stayed in these woods when every instinct told me to leave. The ground cracked, just a hairline fracture near the base of a pine, but the sound of it was enough to make me stagger back. A rush of warm air spilled upward, carrying that smell again, earth and rot and old water. Then I saw it, a hand. It wasn't human anymore, though it might have been once. It rose slowly through the split soil, the skin dark as sap, fingers long and wrong, like the bones had been stretched. The hand pressed flat against the snow, steadying itself, and then another followed. Something was pulling itself out of the ground. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, but I didn't scream. Some part of me was too far gone to panic. I just watched. It stood taller than a man, shoulders hunched, its body wrapped in what looked like strips of bark and moss. Where its face should have been, there was only a hollow, a smooth oval that reflected the moonlight like wet stone. It tilted its head, listening, and then it spoke. But it didn't use words, it used sound, my sound. It repeated my breath, my heartbeat, my trembling. It mirrored me perfectly until I couldn't tell which heartbeat was mine anymore. Then softly it whispered what I knew it would. Stay. The snow around it began to sink, forming a perfect circle as the ground softened beneath us both. Beneath that thin layer of frost, I could see shapes moving, figures trapped under the ice, their faces turned upward, eyes open. Barrett was there. Caleb, others I couldn't name. Their mouths moved silently, as if finishing sentences they'd started long ago. I backed away. The creature didn't follow. It only raised one hand and pressed its palm against a nearby pine. The tree shuddered, and I swear to you, it breathed. Its bark expanded, exhaled, then closed again like a lung. That was when I understood. The forest wasn't haunted by spirits. It was the spirits. Every missing soul, every vanished voice, absorbed into its roots and soil. It remembered them all, and it wanted me too. I ran. I ran until my legs gave out, falling face first into the snow halfway down the ridge. I didn't stop to see if it was following. I didn't need to. The forest's heartbeat was everywhere now, under me, above me, inside me. By dawn, I made it back to the station. The world looked normal again. The sun rose, the birds sang, and the air was still. But the quiet wasn't peace. It was camouflage. I filed no report. I stopped answering the radio. I just sat at the desk, staring at the maps pinned to the wall, tracing the same patterns of missing people. Each disappearance formed a line, And when you connected them, they curved in a perfect spiral right over the cave. That was 3 winters ago. I still work here, though I don't patrol much anymore. The department thinks I'm useful for desk duty, paperwork, incident logs, visitor permits. It's better that way. They don't hear what I hear. Every night when the wind dies and the snow settles, I can still make out the faint rhythm under the floorboards, the forest's breathing. Sometimes it syncs with mine. Sometimes it's faster, and sometimes, just before dawn, I hear a voice outside the window. It says my name softly like a friend calling me home. And for a moment, I almost believe it. Because after all these years, I understand what the locals meant when they said not to answer. It wasn't superstition, it was survival. But I also understand something else, something that keeps me from leaving, even when the fear crawls up my throat. This forest is alive because we give it pieces of ourselves. Every sound, every footstep, every breath we leave behind becomes part of its story. It doesn't kill out of malice. It collects. It remembers. I've walked its trails long enough to know that maybe I've already joined it. Maybe every word I've spoken into the dark is already echoing there, caught in the resin of old trees, waiting for the next ranger to hear. So if you ever come here, if you ever find yourself beneath these pines when the wind goes still, listen carefully. If you hear someone calling your name, no matter how familiar it sounds, don't answer. Just keep walking, because the forest remembers, and some stories were never meant to be told twice. They say the forest keeps what it wants. I used to think that was just a phrase, something the locals around Cascade County would toss out when a hiker went missing, or a hunter's trail cam caught something strange in the mist. But after 15 years as a ranger in these mountains, I've learned that the pines don't just stand. They listen, they remember. And sometimes, when the wind dies and the woods fall too still, they whisper back. I'm not the kind of man who believed in spirits. My name doesn't matter much out here. It's the forest that names you. I was 38 when I transferred to the Northern Cascades district, just outside a town called Red Hollow. Back then, I still thought I understood these woods. The way the sun broke through the crowns at dawn, the hush that fell right before a storm, the way sound bent between trees like water. I thought the worst thing I'd ever see would be a mangled campsite after a bear got curious. I was wrong. The first year passed quietly. I did my rounds, filed my reports, checked the remote shelters. I came to love the solitude, even the silence. It has a rhythm like breathing, but sometimes that rhythm breaks. Sometimes the woods hold their breath. That's when I started to notice the whispers. It began one autumn evening near the end of my shift. The sky was bleeding orange through the branches, the kind of color that makes the whole forest glow like it's on fire. I was walking the perimeter trail near Ridge 7, a quiet stretch where no one camps anymore because of the old landslide years ago. The trees there grow in twisted angles, roots exposed like veins. The air feels heavier there, damp and mineral, almost metallic. I remember stopping to adjust my pack when I heard it, faint, soft, like wind threading through a reed flute. Only it wasn't the wind. It had cadence, rhythm, like words I couldn't quite catch. I froze. The sound came from ahead, maybe 50 yards. I radioed in, no answer. I should have turned back, but duty gets tangled with pride in this job. You tell yourself it's just an animal, maybe an echo. You tell yourself you're trained for this. I walked forward. Each step sank into loam. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Even the insects stopped. I remember feeling my own heartbeat louder than my boots. When I reached the clearing, there was nothing, just a ring of pines and a strange pattern of branches laid out in the dirt, almost like a spiral. I crouched to inspect it, thinking some kid made it. Then I saw the claw marks on the trees, high up, maybe 10 feet. Deep gouges, 3 at a time, each line clean and deliberate. I shined my light upward. Something had shredded bark all the way around the clearing. Not random, circular. I backed up slowly, told myself it was a bear. Only bears don't make spirals. They don't move in silence either. As I turned to leave, I heard the whisper again, closer this time. I can't describe the sound exactly. It wasn't coming through the air. It was inside the trees, like they were exhaling words through their rings. That was the first night I brought the forest home with me. Even after I drove back to the station, showered, wrote my report, the sound stayed, like static behind thought. That's when I started reading the old case logs. Missing hikers, strange footprints, accounts of screams that came from nowhere. Some of the oldest reports dated back before the park was even official land. The locals had a name for that area, Hollow's Breath. Over the next months, small things kept happening. My trail cams would trigger with no movement. I'd find tracks that began in mud but ended in stone. Once, while on night patrol, I found a cabin light burning in a section of forest that hadn't had standing structures in decades. When I hiked out the next morning, there was no trace of it, just frost where the ground should have been dry. I tried to explain it all away, at first. Isolation plays tricks. Sound travels strangely between slopes. But there are moments you can't rationalize, moments that strip you down to something primal. One came that winter when I was called out to check a missing snowshoer reported by his family. He'd last been seen near the Pine Hollow Trail, same area as before. I went alone. Snow had fallen hard and visibility was low, just white on white. But I could follow the prints, 2 sets actually, his and something larger following. The prints beside his weren't shaped like any animal I knew. They were long, flat, with a drag behind the heel, like something half walking, half sliding, and they were deep, heavier than a man's weight. I followed them for maybe half a mile before they disappeared, both sets, into untouched snow. It wasn't wind. The snowfall had stopped hours earlier. It was like they'd been lifted away. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that empty snow. I started to realize how small I was out here, how the line between safety and disappearance is just one step past reason. I told myself I'd quit after the season ended, transfer somewhere flatter, maybe Arizona, but something kept me here. Maybe curiosity, maybe defiance, or maybe because once the forest starts speaking to you, leaving doesn't help. It follows. The following spring thaw came late, and with it, a sense that something had been waiting beneath the snow. You could feel it in the ground, soft, heavy, reluctant to let go of winter. The meltwater trickled through the gullies like veins, and every sound seemed dampened, distant. I'd been assigned to trail restoration duty, repairing washouts near the western ridge, just a few miles from the clearing where I'd heard the whispers. I told myself I was fine. New season, new start. But the forest doesn't reset the way we do. It remembers. A local trapper named Harris came to the station one morning, pale as birch bark, clutching a torn snare in his hands. He swore something had ripped it clean from the tree trunk, steel cable and all. I asked if he'd seen it, but he just shook his head. Didn't have to, he said. Heard it breathe. That word, breathe, hit me harder than it should have. Because I'd been hearing the same thing at night when the wind pushed against my cabin walls. Not a howl, not an animal's cry, just a slow, measured inhaling, like lungs bigger than a man's, pulling in the forest air and letting it out somewhere deep beneath the roots. That week, I started noticing a pattern. 3 hikers, all gone missing within 10 days, all last seen along trails that converged near Hollow's Breath, their names blurred together after a while. Young, adventurous, maybe careless, but their families' voices never did. Panic has a sound you can't unhear. I led 2 of the searches myself. We found nothing but torn clothing snagged on bark and footprints that stopped mid-stride. The snow had melted by then, but even mud holds memory. These didn't fade, they just ended. I began keeping a log, not for the department, but for myself. Every detail, every anomaly. I didn't want to become one of those rangers you read about, the ones who see ghosts in tree lines. But patterns were forming. The whispering always came when temperatures dropped below freezing. The claw marks only appeared facing north. And once, when I took a thermal camera out of curiosity, the pines around that clearing radiated heat like living things, 30 degrees warmer than the air. One evening, I hiked back toward that area. I told myself I was just confirming trail erosion, but deep down, I think I wanted answers. The forest was a shade darker there, the needles denser, the air heavy with resin and wet earth. Every step seemed to echo longer than it should have. I found the clearing again, though it looked different now, overgrown, as if the forest had tried to swallow it whole. The spiral of branches was gone, but something else was there, a cave entrance I could have sworn didn't exist before. It wasn't large, maybe 6 feet wide, but the darkness inside seemed thick, like oil. The air coming out was warmer than the air around it, carrying a sour metallic scent. I crouched, shined my flashlight inside, expecting roots or animal bones. Instead, I saw scratch marks, deep ones, carved into the stone, spiraling inward. That's when I heard movement behind me. Just a single branch snapping, but in the silence it was like thunder. I turned, scanned with my light. The beam caught something pale between the trees. Not fur, not fabric, skin. A shoulder, massive, vanishing behind a trunk before I could focus. I called out standard protocol, identified myself, demanded a response. Nothing. The woods went still again, unnaturally so. Even my breath felt like a trespass. I took a step back, then another, keeping the cave in my peripheral vision. That's when I smelled it. Wet musk and blood, thick enough to taste. Then came the breathing, long, deliberate inhales that matched my own heartbeat. I froze. My radio crackled in my pack, a voice faint, distorted by static. Only it wasn't dispatch. It was whispering my name. I don't remember running, only that I did. My light bounced wildly through the dark, branches tearing at my jacket, the forest closing in on all sides. When I finally broke through the tree line and stumbled into the open, the sky had gone black. I fell to my knees, hands shaking, lungs on fire. My radio hissed one last time, then went dead. When I got back to the station, I didn't file a report. What would I even write? Saw something tall, human-shaped, half in shadow, whispered my name. I locked the door, poured coffee I didn't drink, and stared at my hands. There were pine needles under my nails, embedded deep. I hadn't noticed pulling them up from the ground. That's when I realized something had changed. The forest wasn't just watching anymore. It knew me. Weeks passed. I avoided the hollow's breath region, took shifts closer to base. The locals started talking more, rumors spreading through Red Hollow about shapes in the fog, about something walking the ridgelines at dusk. One man swore he saw a giant silhouette kneeling beside a stream, washing blood from its hands. The sheriff laughed it off as mountain lion hysteria. But I saw the fear in the man's eyes. He believed it. The last straw came that summer. A team of biologists requested clearance to set motion sensors near the ridge for wildlife tracking. I volunteered to escort them, figuring I'd at least control what we ran into. We set up camp near the creek. It was routine at first, jokes, data logs, the hum of the generator. But that night, sometime after midnight, one of them shook me awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I did. Knocking. 3 slow raps against wood, spaced evenly apart, echoing through the trees. It came from no direction, and every direction at once. I got up, grabbed my flashlight, scanned the perimeter. Nothing. Then the knocking came again, closer, this time followed by a soft hum, low and rhythmic, almost like breathing. The biologists huddled near the fire, whispering. I told them to stay put, but curiosity got the better of me. I followed the sound down the slope toward the creek. The water glowed faintly with moonlight, calm and glassy. Then something huge broke the reflection. I caught a glimpse. 2 eyes, white and lidless, staring from the opposite bank. For a second, I thought it was a trick of the light. Then it stood up. It was taller than any man I'd ever seen, shoulders nearly scraping a low branch, body covered in matted fur the color of ash. But the strangest thing wasn't the size, it was the stillness. It moved without sound, each motion deliberate, controlled. It looked at me, then tilted its head, like it recognized me. I raised my flashlight, and it turned away, stepping backward into the dark. But before it vanished, I saw its hand touch the trunk of a pine, long fingers pressing into the bark until sap bled down like tears. Then the whisper came again. From everywhere, from inside the trees themselves, soft and overlapping, as if 100 voices were saying the same word at once. Stay. I ran. This time, I didn't stop until I saw the campfire again. The others were gone. Their tents were flattened, the gear half-packed, footprints leading in circles around the fire pit like they'd been walking endlessly in confusion. I shouted their names until my voice cracked. No answer. The forest swallowed the sound whole, as if it didn't want me waking something that had gone back to sleep. I forced myself to follow the tracks. They led toward the creek, then split apart, one set heading upriver, the other two disappearing into the slope where the pine roots clawed through the dirt like veins. I took the main path toward the water, my light cutting through fog that had rolled in from nowhere. The air was colder now, carrying that same metallic tang, the one that clings to your tongue like fear itself. I found a flashlight half buried in the mud. The batteries were warm, still running, its beam pointed toward the opposite bank. There, across the creek, something glimmered in the darkness, a piece of silver fabric fluttering against a tree. One of the sleeping bags. I stepped closer, knelt to grab it. That's when I saw the prints again. Massive, sunken deep into the bank, toes splayed wide, edges crisp as if made seconds before. I knew better than to follow. But knowing better doesn't always mean acting better. I crossed anyway. The forest beyond the creek was a different world. The air thickened, sounds warped. Each footstep landed half a beat too late, like the earth itself was hesitating. Then, ahead, I saw light, a weak, yellow glow pulsing through the trees. The biologists' lanterns. Relief hit me so hard it hurt. But when I got closer, I realized the lights weren't on the ground. They were hanging high in the branches, swinging slowly like someone had placed them there as markers, or trophies. I called out again, my breath fogged in the beam. No reply. Then, from behind me, I heard a single splash in the creek I just crossed. Heavy. Purposeful. I turned and saw only mist. Something was following me. I kept moving forward, deeper into the trees, until I reached a small clearing. The ground was scarred with drag marks, wide, shallow trenches like something heavy had been pulled through. And at the center stood an old, half-collapsed cabin. I'd seen it before in archival maps, long condemned, part of a miner's claim from the early 1900s. Only now it looked maintained. Fresh footprints led to the door. I approached slowly. The smell hit first. Rot, wet wood, and something else underneath, sour and animal. I pushed the door open with the barrel of my flashlight. Inside, the floor was covered with pine boughs laid in spirals, just like before. At the center sat a pile of bones, cleaned white, some human, some not. And above them, carved into the beams, were words I could barely read through the years of resin and decay. We listen, and it listens back. I don't remember dropping my flashlight, but when it rolled across the floor, its beam fell on a hand. Not a skeleton, a real hand, gray and leathery, long fingers tipped with black nails. It twitched, just once. That's when the knocking began again. 3 times. Slow, rhythmic, from the walls, from inside the wood. I backed toward the door, my pulse hammering. The knocking grew louder, traveling along the boards like it was chasing me. Then, all at once, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I turned and ran out into the trees. The fog had thickened so much I could barely see. I sprinted blind, trusting my instincts more than the light. Then I heard them, the voices of the biologists, but not from in front of me, from everywhere. Soft, echoing, overlapping, like they were being played back through water. They were calling my name, pleading, screaming, then laughing. When I finally stumbled out of the woods and found the trail again, dawn was breaking. I made it back to base after sunrise, mud to my knees, shaking so bad I could barely unlock the door. I called it in. Search teams combed the area for weeks. They found no bodies, no gear, not even the cabin. The official report blamed terrain hazards and disorientation. They wrote my name down as psychological distress witness. I didn't argue. Let them call me shaken, paranoid, unstable, whatever helped them sleep. But the forest doesn't lie, and it doesn't forget. Months later, a retired ranger named Glenn visited the station after hearing rumors. He was in his 70s, face lined like tree bark, voice like gravel. When I told him what I'd seen, he didn't laugh. He just stared through the window toward the tree line and said quietly, "You found the breath, didn't you?" He told me the legend wasn't new. Long before the park was formed, before settlers came through, the native tribes had stories about the same slopes. They called it Atatsu, meaning the one that breathes with the mountain. Some believed it was a guardian spirit that punished those who disturbed burial grounds. Others said it was older than the forest itself, a being that mimicked the living, testing their will to stay or flee. But all the stories agreed on one thing. Once it learns your name, it calls it back until you answer. I asked him what the spirals meant. He said they were not warnings, they were invitations. The old miners who disappeared near Hollow's Breath had carved them, trying to call the spirit out, to use its power. Some claimed they'd seen it, pale and towering, walking through the mist, carrying tools it had stolen from their dead. "That thing doesn't hunt," Glenn said. "It gathers." He leaned in close then, his breath shaking. You ever notice how the trees lean in on that ridge? Like they're bending to listen? That's because they are. The forest there is one body. The breath moves through it. I wanted to dismiss him, but his words sank deep. The knocking, the whispering, the heat inside the trees. It all fit horribly. For weeks after that, I couldn't bring myself to patrol the ridge again. I started taking night shifts near the lower camps where the air felt lighter. But even there, something followed. I'd hear branches creak with no wind, smell that metallic scent when no storm was near. And once, driving home after a long shift, I saw something in my rearview mirror, tall, half hidden in the glow of my brake lights, standing perfectly still in the middle of the road. When I turned around, it was gone. I told myself it was exhaustion. I wanted to believe that. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had my name now. It started again the following winter. Same stretch of forest, same sounds threading through the cold, soft knocking, almost polite, like someone testing a door. Only this time, it followed me home. I'd hear it faintly against my cabin wall, 3 slow taps at random hours of the night. I'd open the door and find nothing but snow, untouched, no prints. The pine outside leaned slightly closer each week, branches brushing the roof when there wasn't a breath of wind. Sleep came in fragments, dreams of tunnels and spirals, of whispers curling around my name until it no longer sounded like mine. Sometimes I'd wake to the smell of wet soil in my room, as if the ground itself had opened beneath the bed. I stopped talking to people. The other rangers avoided me anyway. They'd heard the rumors. The man who went too far into Hollow's Breath. The man who came back wrong. Then one morning, dispatch called about a lost camper, solo hiker, last pinged near the western ridge. I should have refused, passed it to someone else. But something in me tightened, something that wasn't quite duty. Maybe I needed to face it, to see if it was real or just my mind breaking apart. I packed light, radio, rope, headlamp, revolver. Snow fell steady as I drove the old Ranger truck up the access road. By the time I reached the trailhead, daylight was already dying. I followed the faint footprints through the snow, but they vanished after a mile, swallowed by drifts. The forest grew darker, quieter. Not peaceful. Waiting. My breath fogged thick in the beam of my headlamp. The trees around me leaned inward, their trunks groaning softly like old men in pain. The trail ended near the same creek I'd crossed months before. The water was half frozen, murmuring beneath a thin crust of ice. On the opposite bank stood the entrance to that cave, the one I'd seen before, only now wider, breathing faint plumes of mist into the cold air. I should have radioed for backup. I didn't. I stepped into the creek, feeling the icy water climb my boots, then climbed up onto the far side. Inside, the air was warm and wet. The walls glistened, pulsing faintly as though alive. My light caught faint carvings, spirals again, dozens of them, scratched deep into the stone, each one circling toward a single point deeper within. The sound of my own heartbeat filled the cave, syncing with a low, rhythmic thrum coming from somewhere ahead. I don't remember deciding to move forward, but my legs carried me. The tunnel sloped downward, narrowing until I had to crouch. The walls seemed to close in with each breath. Then I reached a chamber. The floor was covered in pine needles, impossibly fresh, and at the center stood something that looked almost human, massive, hunched, covered in hair matted with sap and mud. Its back rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. Around it, the air shimmered like heat. My first thought wasn't fear. It was recognition. It turned its head, and I saw its face. Not a monster's, something between man and beast. Eyes pale and unblinking, skin stretched thin like bark over bone. It didn't snarl. It didn't move to attack. It just looked at me, tilting its head the way it had by the creek. And when it spoke, it wasn't through its mouth. The words came from everywhere, through the air, through the stone, through the beating of my own heart. You came back. The voice was layered, deep and hollow, like wind through hollow trunks. I couldn't answer. My throat had closed. The thing took a step closer. The ground shuddered beneath its weight. You took what listens, it said, and now it listens through you. I realized then those spirals, those markings, they weren't symbols of worship or warning. They were channels, conduits. Time I'd entered that place, every sound I'd heard, every whisper, it had been drawing me in, making me part of its memory. The creature's breath hit my face, hot, foul, earthy. Its eyes locked on mine, and for a moment the walls of the cave disappeared. I saw flashes, people I'd never met walking into these woods, calling names I didn't know, their faces blurring, their voices fading into the soil, generations swallowed by the same hunger. Then I saw myself, kneeling among the pines, whispering names that weren't mine, my voice blending with theirs until there was no difference. I stumbled backward, hit the wall. My hand brushed something smooth, metal. My flashlight had fallen. The beam caught the creature's shadow, stretching impossibly long across the cave floor. That's when I noticed it. Where its feet touched the ground, the stone pulsed, beating faintly like a living heart. I fired once. The sound exploded in the confined space, echoing until it didn't sound like a gunshot anymore, but like thunder rolling through miles of forest. When the smoke cleared, the thing was gone. The chamber empty. Only the echoes remained, folding in on themselves until they sounded like breathing again. I ran. I don't know how long or how far, but when I burst out into the night, the forest felt different. Silent, yes, but lighter, like something had exhaled at last. The moon hung low between the branches, blood red, casting everything in a strange metallic glow. I followed the creek back to the trailhead, half expecting to find nothing. But my truck was there, engine cold, snow settled around the tires as if I'd been gone for days. When I got back to the station, dawn was breaking. I looked in the mirror before showering and saw dirt streaked across my face, dark lines that looked almost like bark. My nails were black with sap. And in the reflection, for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw another pair of eyes behind mine. Pale, lidless, watching. I tried to write a report that made sense. Search unsuccessful. No contact. Terrain unstable. But I couldn't stop hearing that voice. You took what listens. The words followed me even after I transferred districts, even after I moved hundreds of miles away. Because here's the truth I finally understood. The forest doesn't need to chase you. Once it knows your name, it only has to wait. The whispering doesn't belong to ghosts or beasts. It's the memory of everything that's ever entered, looping endlessly through the wood and the wind, replaying the stories of those who never left. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear it. The slow rhythm of breath through pine needles, the sound of knocking, faint and patient, just waiting for me to answer. And maybe one day I will. Because part of me never made it out. Part of me stayed where the cave breathes. And when the wind moves through the trees on cold nights, it carries my name too.